Hello and welcome back to the Shepherd's Rest Doc Talk. This is episode 36B.
I'm Cam and this is Julie.
Yes, this is the B'rit Hadashah or the New Testament discussion on this week's Torah portion. And this week's discussion is found in John 6. It's the whole chapter of John 6. And okay, first of all, John, as we know, is kind of the more mystical, spiritual type book.
He deals with the sod.
The sod. That's right, the sod level.
Yes.
And Matthew is the more kingly. Mark is the more the servant. Kind of tailors towards the servant. Luke is more tailors towards he was a man. He was in human form, the Messiah. And so, but John is the one we're going to focus on today. But we will take a little bit from the other three Gospels as well. And John is the only one that tells us that the Feast of Passover is coming. So it kind of makes sense that the crowds are gathering so big because they gather together first in the Galilean area and then they would all travel together in big groups.
And that makes sense because you remember when they were looking for Yeshua, when they were leaving from a festival, they were looking for him and it took them a few days to figure out who was with them. Right, because they're all traveling together.
They're all traveling together.
That makes sense.
Yes. So when you take the account of all four Gospels and get a bigger picture, you get the sense that the crowds are gathering because they want healings. They bring in the sick. He's healing of all their ailments. He's teaching his disciples, but the crowds are like, please heal me. Please bring in the lame, bring in the sick,
take care of my needs.
Take care of my needs. Now, I'm going to say this, and I want to say this very carefully, because healing is a great thing, and I'm not saying that God doesn't heal today. Yeshua healed then, he heals now. But Yeshua's, he always put more emphasis on his teaching because it was the internal healing that's more important than the physical healing of the body, and we're going to see that really play out as chapter 6 goes on.
Which makes sense. It's why he always says, go and sin no more.
Right. So we see a big crowd gathering, and it's getting late. He's teaching, and the disciples come to him and say, Master, you've got to let them go. I mean, we're in a desolate area, and we can't feed all these people.
Right.
Depending on which gospel you read, they all have a different perspective. One says he asked Philip, I don't know, what are we going to do? Another one says that the disciples just came to him and said, we have these 5 loaves and 2 fishes, but John says that there was a boy that brought the 5 loaves and 2 fishes. Now, this is really, really cool. So we've heard all kinds of things, what these symbolize. Well, I'm telling you, I think the Lord showed me something this week.
From a Hebraic perspective, which is why it's going to be so different.
From the Hebraic perspective, I really believe that these 5 loaves represent the 5 books of Torah because it's bread, right?
And they're Jewish.
And they're Jewish, right. 5 loaves of bread, and it's barley. So it's like the early ingathering, right?
Yes.
I mean, that's when the early Passover is all about.
Yes.
Yes. And so then you have 2 fish. Well, what does the 2 fish represent? Oh, it's the church and this. I really think it represents the 2 houses of Israel.
Which would be people.
People, yes, because when he says, I will make you fishers of men, he's saying, fish would be representative of people.
Right.
But it would be the southern kingdom and the northern kingdom. Here he is taking the 5 books of Torah and the southern kingdom and the northern kingdom, blessing them and bringing them together. And then all these people are fed from that revelation because what did his death, burial, and resurrection do? It brought the 2 houses together. So after it says that they reclined and they ate and they were satisfied. Now, where do we see this? In Psalm 23, where it says, Yahweh is my shepherd, I do not lack. He makes me to lie down on green pastures. Mark tells us that the grass was green. He gives that extra detail. He leads me beside still waters. We all know how it goes. Basically, it's a messianic foreshadowing of what it's going to be like in the kingdom because while his death, burial, and resurrection brought the 2 houses together, it only did it spiritually.
Right.
It still has yet to manifest physically. But in the Messianic kingdom, those 2 houses are going to be brought together physically. And we are grafted in because we've gone through this 100 times, at least. Because the northern kingdom was divorced and scattered, and then now they're brought back in through Yeshua's resurrection, we too are part of that family. And so this really does point to, this is another sign that they had, he's the Messiah.
Yeah. And, hooking with Genesis 49 with the prophecies given, and not until you just said that did it click. That was given to Joseph, is all about the abundance, okay? Yes. And then also with Judah is all about when he's going to be king, abundance, okay? And that's the Messianic times. But at that time, all the 12 were together.
Yeah.
I never thought about it. You just said, I was like, gosh, when that Messianic prophecy was given about that kingdom, they were as one. And they never would have thought about being separated.
Right.
So how could it be fulfilled until they're one?
Good.
Yeah, not until you said that.
Yes, and it won't be until the Messianic kingdom. So this was another foreshadow, another sign that he had to give them that he is the Messiah.
Yeah.
Pointing to the Messianic kingdom, not being fulfilled yet, but that it would be. And that he was going to be the one to do it.
Which even gives more strength to the understanding he has to return. You have to wait for him to come back because he didn't finish it all.
We're not done.
Right.
If we have been brought in and he took the 5 books of Torah and the 2 fish and put them together, we cannot separate ourselves from the family.
Right.
Or who's denying Yeshua?
Yeah.
And what he did. Another cool thing about this is that Yeshua did not disperse the food. He gave it to the disciples, and the disciples gave it out. Yeah. Because that is what he's doing, right? He's discipling his 12, and then after his death, burial, and resurrection, he's going to send the 12 out to feed the flock.
Yeah, he says that with Peter.
Right. Both houses, the southern and the northern, because the whole gospel message is... It's here. The kingdom of heaven is at hand because the whole point of the kingdom of heaven is both houses as one. Right. The whole house of Jacob
bringing us back.
We see
so we can go back into the house, so we can all dwell together.
Well, Isaiah 2 and 3 talks about all nations will flow. Hang on, let me just go there for a second. It says in Isaiah 2 and 3, and it shall be in the latter days that the mountain of the house of Yahweh is established on top of the mountains and shall be exalted above the hills, and all nations shall flow to it. And many people shall come and say, come, let us go to the mountain of Yahweh, to the house of the Elohim of Jacob, and let him teach us his way. Now, Jacob is all 12 tribes. Yeah. It's the whole thing. Teach us his ways, and let us walk in his path, for out of Zion comes forth the Torah and the word of Yahweh from Jerusalem. So that's what we're going to be doing in the Messianic era. And the fact that he fed all those people, and they had 12 baskets. Okay, this is something really cool too. So Yeshua tells his disciples, no, gather up the leftovers. And it doesn't say that there were 12 baskets of fish and bread. It only says there were 12 baskets of bread. So going on that 5 books of Torah and the 12 baskets of bread, that's what's been happening for the last 2,000 years since the disciples gave it to him. It says they were broken and they were thrown down and they were cast aside. Hasn't that been what we've done to the Torah?
Yes.
I mean, we've broken the laws. We've cast them down. We've put them aside. We've acted like they were nothing. But he said nothing can go to waste. Gather it all. And it gathered 12 full baskets. Hello, that represents the 12 tribes of Israel, right? As a whole, they're all together. And then he says, take them out into a boat. They take the baskets in a boat, but Yeshua doesn't go. He goes up on a mountain, right?
Yeah.
This is so foreshadowing what's about to happen.
Exactly.
He goes up on a mountain just like he descends back up into heaven. Now they go out in the water, and what happens? The wind picks up and starts tearing. It says it starts tearing the boat apart. And the Lord doesn't come to them until the 4th hour, which is right before dawn.
Yeah.
So at the
it's
darkest
the last hour.
point,
There's only
four
there's
watches.
That's the 4th hour. There's only 4 watches.
That's right. And it's at the 4th watch. I'm sorry, not at the 4th hour. It's the 4th watch. So he comes to them at the 4th watch. He walks on the water. And I love in Revelation how we see that seas of water represent people again.
Yes.
So here he is above it all, above all the wind. He's not being affected by the wind at all. And he wasn't even going to stop in the boat. He was just going to pass by, calm the wind down, and kind of be in there in the midst of them, but they see him and they're freaking out. They're like, it's a ghost, it's a ghost. So he's like, no, it's not, it's just me, calm down, don't get all crazy. Only in Matthew do we have the story of Peter walking on the water. None of the other commentaries give the that foreshadowing, which I think is funny because that's to the messianic, to the kingly part, right? So here you have so many people in Israel starting to recognize that Yeshua is the Messiah, right? And what does Peter say? He doesn't say, oh, Messiah, it's you. Let me come out to you. He said, if it's really you, command me to come out to you. So he says, well, come, just like he is now, right? It says to the Laodicea church in Revelation, he stands at the door saying, come out to me. And so we know the story. Peter goes out, starts to sink because he's worried about all the wind. And he says, Master, save me. Right at the last minute before he goes under, Master, save me. And he pulls him back up. Now, I really think this probably foreshadows the fact that Peter's going to deny him and then be reinstated by Yeshua. Yeah. He starts to doubt, and when he feels like he's going to get in trouble, he just denies that he even knows him and pulls him out. But I also see it foreshadowing Israel now. It's going to get really bad before they finally cry out to the Messiah, save us.
And I would almost venture to say not just those in Israel, but
all
over
of Israel.
And everyone standing with Israel. Because the fate, I mean, if you're around ISIS or something like that, your fate, if you stand with Israel, is the same as if you are Israeli. It's the same. It's who you support. So, I mean, that could not just foreshadow just, a select group. It's all those who identify with, who say, yes, you're my brothers.
Yes. Later on, when they get to the other side, once he pulls Peter up and they get in the boat, the winds die down and they are knocking on the docks in Capernaum. They've reached their destination. Now, he kind of fooled the crowds into thinking that the disciples went without him, but the same crowds that he just fed are all looking for him. Okay? And they find him in Capernaum. They're like, how did you get here? You know? And he said, you're not coming to me because you're looking for a sign. You're coming to me because I fed you with bread and you were satisfied. In other words, they're coming to him because they want to get fed again. Yeah. They want their flesh again satisfied. Right. And they're missing the fact that he's the Messiah. Right. Okay, they're missing that. So,
well, and I wonder, once they were satisfied, was it, oh, well, I don't have to look any further, not even necessarily looking for Messiah, but just, well, I'm happy.
Right. Yes. Now let's think about that with healing of the body. If we're seeking God every day because we have an ailment and it causes us to seek him every day. Now, if he just heals us like that, we'll be like, all right, thank you. And we go about our way. We don't seek him anymore. So a lot of times I think that happens. Yeah. And that was happening here. Healings were happening all over the place, but we see from the rest of John 6, it's still just his own disciples with him at the end, like, well, are you going to go anywhere? Yeah.
Well, didn't he say, or is that where he says, yes, you're going to go? Get out of here too.
Right. So that's crucial in understanding the rest of John 6 because the rest of John 6 is all spiritual. Mm-hmm. This is not a physical, tangible thing that we need to understand. See, him coming in the flesh and destroying the flesh is going to give way to the resurrection, which in turn gives way to the Messianic kingdom because it brings us all together. Right. Now, we're not physically together yet. It's spiritual.
It's like the down payment. We have the down payment of the Holy Spirit.
We have the down payment.
And now it will be manifested when he returns.
Right. So that's why he says, unless you eat my flesh and drink my blood, you can't partake in this. Because that is a spiritual... Because he says, I'm the bread that came down from heaven. Right. And he's not talking about feeding us physically. He's talking about feeding us spiritually.
Right. He's a living Torah.
Right. Until he does that, we can't come in.
Right.
And there's no hope for the Jews either.
Right.
It's not until his body is broken and his blood spills that we can all come back together. So to eat his flesh and to drink his blood is to follow Torah. Right. I mean, you can't separate those. Good. It's not to actually take of a Passover meal. While that foreshadows what we do. But just taking part in Passover isn't going to do it.
Right.
Nor is it just taking communion every week, just to have the body and the blood in you. That's not going to do it. He's not concerned with your physical flesh, what you're doing in the flesh. He's concerned with where your heart is.
Right.
And when we
Which is manifested by what we do in the flesh.
Absolutely, yes. Everything physically manifests itself in the flesh.
Right.
That's why you're not going to find yourself in the kingdom physically unless spiritually you're there first.
Yeah.
So until he is internalized the living Torah, he's the bread that came down. He even says, Moses had the manna that satisfied temporarily, but they died.
Right.
I satisfy eternally.
Right.
So he's the eternal word. So as we learn the physical word, it internalizes.
Yes.
We begin to walk it out. We begin to perform the mitzvahs. We will find ourselves in the Messianic kingdom. And that is what the rest of John 6 is about. But because we don't hook it with the 5 loaves and 2 fish, because he's talking to the same group of people. He fed their physical need, he did it physically, and now he's doing it spiritually. Isn't that what happened? He came physically and died, and now spiritually we are doing the same thing. Dying to ourselves and walking the way we're supposed to walk.
And it says too, if we don't suffer like Christ.
Right.
And of course that doesn't necessarily mean you're on the cross. It's the seasoned. It's the idea and understanding of dying to ourselves in order to live for the
Overcoming.
word. Yeah.
Yes.
It's the overcoming ourselves, not overcoming the devil or overcoming this bad situation. It's overcoming our flesh, and which is sometimes harder.
Yes. And I thought this was interesting. When the disciples were out on the boat, it says that they were while the boat was being torn apart, but they strove against the waves and they strove against the wind, and they got nowhere. It just kept drifting them out even further, no matter how hard. And it reminded me of the Church of Philadelphia in Revelation 3:8, where in the middle of it, it says, see, I have set before you an open door that no one is able to shut, that you have little power, yet you guarded my word. What's in the baskets?
Oh, the Torah.
The word,
yeah.
the bread that's broken, and that's just it. I was like, that is it, because it's so broken right now. It's not whole. We don't have anyone correctly representing it. We are waiting for that Messianic area, but he's coming.
Yeah.
In the 4th watch. I hope that's soon.
And it's
but
like
he's coming.
Yes, and in Jeremiah 16, 19 or Jeremiah 16, where it talks about we grab a hold of his followers, of their tzitzis, and we say we've been given lies and vanity, and
that's right, and that's exactly and that's exactly what we're doing. And
love it.
But anyway, that's it. All of
Good stuff,
John 6.
people.
Yes. All right. Well, thank you for joining us for this week. We will see you next week for episode 37. And we hope you have a fantastic week. Shalom.